Alright, subject 3, class 3 operations operated full system supply point. Given the requirements to store the issue the bulk of the petroleum at the class 3 supply point at the field environment, personal material required to perform the task, 7 military occupational specialists, qualified N2F soldiers, risk management procedures, applicable material safety data sheets, personnel protective equipment, and a complete FSSP F-ton cargo trailer prefabricated supporting 5,000 tank semi trailer, spill container free extinguisher, extra hose fittings and best drain and extra hose fittings for berm drains, layout plans, a plan for the terrain, forklift and operator, equipment for the firewall, construction facility response plan, spill prevention control countermeasures, and the unit hazard with waste material management policy, oil discharge contingency plan, ODCP. If required, of DA Form 343, daily issues of petroleum products, DAA 7651, request for the issue of turn-in, the DOD Form 1970 military occupational utilization record, DA Form 5987E, motor equipment dispatch, DA Form 2404, equipment inspection maintenance and worksheet, DA Form 5988E, equipment instance maintenance worksheet, EGA, full access all reference materials. Perform operators preventive maintenance check services, dispatch equipment, offload, assemble, operate, and maintain full accountability record, perform the quality surveillance, and disassemble the FSSP, the Federal System Supply Point, without injury and personal damage to equipment or pollution or the environment. Failure to perform the task correctly may result in damage to the equipment or injury to the death. If the task with if in the task, as with the task involving extensive handling of the petroleum products, make sure the equipment is on the hand to contain the cleanup spills, unpack, inspect, position, and equipment of the convenient access at the beginning of the task. Review the requirements before performing the task and ensure the drip pans, waste fuel containers as the appropriate size to contain the waste fuel generated at the task. Use the drip pans at any point of the spill that likely to occur, such as valves, nozzles. Continually observe the equipment, take care of the performing tasks, and minimize the possibility of petroleum spills. The spills occurs immediately. Operation take steps to stop and contain and clean up the spill. Report all spills immediately to your supervisor. Apply risk management, understand and execute risk management procedures, a risk management process, risk controls, command guidance directly by the higher headquarters. Access variable hazard, continuous report risk and risk reduction measures of the appropriate of the chain of command. 2. Employ environmental stewardship protection programs according to the task 101-92 F1413. Read and understand unit installation standard operation procedures, operation orders, requirements for the requisition, storing, handling, and disposing of the hazardous material. Where appropriate for the protective personnel equipment is as required. Gloves, hearing protection goggles to be worn with the performing of the fueling operation. Dispatch vehicles equipped with the DOD Form 1970 and DA Form 5987E. Before, during, and after operations, PCS system component according to the operated technical manuals, and note the DA Form 2404 and DA Form 5988E. Any faults for the found of the preventing check service maintenance. Preventive maintenance check services for the federal supply service. Once again, that is Federal System Supply Point. You unload the Federal System Supply Point. Place the Federal System Supply Point equipment on the side of the site according to the layout of the plan. Lay out the equipment in this order. Collapsible tanks maintained 40 feet from between the 110,000 gallon tanks and 150 feet between larger tanks. Avoid the steps on bags as you unfold them. Inspect the bags and tanker fillers, vent assembly serviceability as you lay out the tanks. Pump and filter separators place the 350 gallon per minute pump in the station. Lower the retractable support of the chock wheels on the pumps. Place the 350 GPM gallons per minute separator in position. Put the shims under the skids to help level them. Ground each of the pump and the filter separator when placed. Connect the hose in the pump pipe to automatic water drain out on the filter separators. fitting the assembly of the hoses. Ensure the suction hose are on the receiving side of the system. Discharge the hoses are on their dispensing side. Place the 3-inch discharge hose at the tank truck bottom loading points. Place a 1.5-inch discharge at 500-gallon collapsible drum filling points. Place a 1-inch discharge hose at the vehicle refueling points. Keep all dust and plugs and caps on the hoses and the fittings that they are connected. Fuel, oil, service nozzles. Attach 1-inch discharge nozzles. Make sure each nozzle has a dust cover and place it under the nozzle to prevent them from lying on the ground. Assemble the FSSP operate the fuel system supply point. Assemble the fuel system supply point equipment. Position the connecting components as follows. Steps may change according to the terrain and mission requirements. Position the tank and liners inside the berms. Inspect the cuts and tears of the snags as is laid. Position collapsible tanks and berms. Inspect each tank to the cuts and tears and snags as it is laid out. Put out the connection drain fitting assemblies on each of the tank. Position the connecting filter discharge assembly on the top of each tank. Position 2 tanks for reference poles, one on each side of each tank. Attach a rope at each set of the poles. Ensure the ropes of the 4 feet high in the middle of the tank. Places 2 suction hoses at each of the tank in a straight line from the filter discharge ports to the outside of the berms. Place the T-valve assembly at each end of the suction hose. Place the suction hose or the crossover hose at the double T receiving point. Place the 6 suction hoses between the double T valve and assembly at the tank 1 and 2. Place steps 1 and 1. Repeat steps 1 through 9 for tanks 2 through 6. Place a signal T valve assembly at each end of the crossover hose. Place a 6 suction hose at the straight line between the single T valve assembly at the tank 1 and tank 2. Repeat steps 11 through 12 in tanks 2 through 6. Connects the suction hose into each filter discharge ports. Connect the 2 suction hoses together, extended to each of the tank's filled discharge port. Connect the tank doubles T-valve assembly to each of the end of that suction hoses connection crossover hoses to the double T receiving ports. Connect the signal T to the valve to the assembly to the end of the crossover hoses. Connect the 6 section hoses from the double T the assembly to the tanks 1 and 2. Repeat steps 14 through 16 for the tanks through the 2 through 6. Connect the 6 suction hoses between the single T valve and the assembly of the tanks 1 and 2. Repeat the steps of the tanks 2 through 6, please. The 2 suction hoses in the straight line and from the single T of the valve assembly toward the receiving. Place the filter separator at the end of each of the suction hoses. Place 1 suction hose at the inlet of the inside of the separator. Place the 350 GPM pump at the end of the suction hose. Place the 2 suction hoses in a straight line from the pump toward the receiving end. Place the Y assembly at the end of the suction hose. Place the 3 suction hoses on the right side of the 3 suction hoses on the left side of the Y assembly. Place a quick valve assembly at each of the suction hoses on the right side, quickly acting on the valve at the end of the suction hose on the left side, connecting one end of the 2 suction hoses on the single T valve assembly. Connect the 2 suction hoses together to connect the end of each of the filter separators outlet port. Connect 1 suction hose to the filter separator inlet and other end of the pump outlet. Connect one of the 2 suction hoses on the pump inlet. Connect the 2 suction hoses together. Connect the other end of the Y. Connect 1 of 3 suction hoses on the right side, left side of the Y assembly and to the Y. Connect the 3 suction hoses together at the right side and left side of the Y assembly. Connect the 2 and gate the valve to the end of the hose. Place the 3 suction hoses at the end of the double T valve assembly extending from the tank 3. Place 3 suction hoses at the end of the double T valve extending from the tank 6. Place 2 suction hoses at the end of the T valve extending from tank 3. Place 2 suction hoses at the end of the T valve assembly extend from tank 6. Place one of the T-valve assembly from between the 4 suction hoses. Place 2 suction hoses at the end of at the end of the signal T of the valve assembly. Place 350-gallon per minute pump at the end of the 2 suction hoses. One discharge hose at the pump outlet. Place the 350-gallon per minute filter separator at the end of the discharge hose. Place the 25 discharge hose at the end of the filter separator. Place the Y assembly at the end of the discharge hose. Place 3 discharge hoses on the right side and the left side of the Y assembly. Place the gate at the valve at the end of the suction hose. Connect one suction hose to the double T valve extending from tank 3. Connect 3 suction hoses. Connect one of the suction hoses at T-valve extending from the tank 6. Connection 3 suction hoses connect from one suction of the single T-valve assembly extending to the tank 3. Connect 2 suction hoses. Connect 56. Connect single T-valve assembly at each hose. Connect the 2 hoses extending of the single T-valve assembly together. Connect the end of the suction hose extended from the double T valve assembly for the tank 3 on the left pump inlet. Connect one of the end of the suction hoses extended from the double T valve assembly of the tank valve in the right pump inlet. Connect one of the end of the suction hoses extended from the single T valve assembly for the right of the pump in the outlet. Connect one of the end of the discharge hose of the left valve outlet and the other end of the valve in the inlet port. Connect one of the end of the 25-foot discharge hoses on the filter separator outlet and the other end of the Y assembly. Connect one of 3 discharge hoses on the right side of the left side of the Y assembly and the Y to the Y. Connect the 2 discharges together still on the right side to the left side of the Y assembly and connect the gate valve to the end of the hose. Disconnect the cap and the 2 suction hoses. Disconnect the cap and remain the suction hose from the double T valve assembly. Place a spill connector on the under the double T valve assembly extending to the tank 2. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the receiving points. Hold open the end of the hose and spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose to the least shoulder higher and uncap the hose. 70. Walk the fuel in the hose back down the double T. Walk the fuel in the hose back towards the double T assembly. When reaching the spill container, go back to beginning in the hose and walk through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap 6 suction hose and disconnect the suction hose leading to the tank 2 holding on the end of the hose of spill container. Recheck all connections to make sure they are tight. Ensure the drip pans are in place under the nozzle. Other connections are likely to leak. 10. Inform the supervisor when system is ready to operate. Perform operations. Operate the fuel system supply point to receive the issue product. Death, serious injury can occur from the exploding ignited static electricity before operating fuel system panel. Be sure they are all components and properly grounded. When you do this, you want to actually draw the valves like on a valve legend sheet where it shows you all the valves, and then you just draw through every step. Warning: death and serious injury can occur with a fire explosion of the fuels. To avoid the fuel explosion during the operation of the fuel system supply point, do not allow any flame producing material within 100 feet of the fuel system supply point. Do not smoke and allow smoking during the fuel refueling operations. You are not allowed the fuel to drip out onto the hot surface. Do not refuel equipment when the engine is running. Spindle fuel can ignite, explode, and can cause serious injury, death, and all valves are to remain closed position unless one of the following steps specifically instructs you to open a particular valve. Be sure the fire extinguisher is available in operation. Store in the fuel supply point. Attach the gate valve to the receiving of the manifold outlet of the fuel's transportation of the pipeline on open gate valves. Open the gate valves and the hose like a fuel transporter in the pipeline fuel storage tank. Start the receiving pump. When all the fuel is transported and transport tanks are full, shut down the pump and close the fuel supply point. Fuel system supply point. Record the DA form 364 according to the DA pamphlet 710.2.1. Dispense the fuel to the FSP fuel supply point. If the fuel is normally drawn from the tank at the time the valve leading to the other tanks in the system as are closed in the frictionless friction loss and reduction of the pumping capacity. Open the gate leading to the dispensing tank to dispense the pump. Ensure that all the quick-acting valves leading to the pump dispense the nozzles are closed to the operating pump. Operate the pump. Open the quick-action valves leading to the pump filter separator to dispense the nozzle. Dispense the product. When operating complete, close. When operation is complete, close all the valves and shut down the pump. Record issue of the DA form 3643 and 27651 according to DA PAM 71021. Report all maintenance shortcomings from the found during the operation on the system of the DA form 2404 equivalent. Check the site of any of the spills, clean up them, and perform any other perform after operations preventive maintenance checking services of the federal the fuel system supply point equipment. Equivalent product of the fuel system supply point in the 5,000-gallon tanker semi-trailer. Disassemble the place of the fuel system supply point equipment into the trainer's appropriate disassemble system as follows. Place the spill container under the pump inlet. Disconnect the suction hose of the pump inlet cap hose. Place the slip container under the Y assembly. Disconnect the right suction hose of the Y assembly and the cap Y. Hold open end of the hose in the spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose at the least shoulder height. Open gate valve. Walk the fuel hose back towards the Y, reaching the spill container. Go to the backing of the hose of the walk through the again. Disconnect the gate from the suction hose and cap hose. Cap each end of the suction hose in the spill container. Disconnect the cap 3 suction hose. Disconnect the middle suction hose from the Y assembly and cap Y. Hold onto the end of the hose of the spill container. Lift the other end of the hose on the left shoulder high until uncap it. Hold the fuel in the back hose back towards the Y. When reaching the spill container, go into the beginning of the hose and walk the fuel through the again. Place the spill container under the pump outlet. Disconnect the suction hose from the pump outlet. Cap of the hose. Place the spill capper under the filter separator inlet port. Disconnect the suction hose from the fill separator inlet port. Cap the inlet port. Fold onto the end of the hose of the spill container. Lift the other end of the hose at least shoulder high and uncap and let in the drain into the spill container. Cap each end of the suction hose. Place the container under the single T-valve assembly. Disconnect suction hose from the single T-valve assembly and cap hose. Place the spill container under the filter separator outlet port. Disconnect the suction hose from the outlet port and hold open the end of the house in the spill container. Lift the other end of the house at the least shoulder height and the uncapping hose. Walking fuel in the hose toward the separator. When reaching the spill container, go back to the beginning of the hose and walk through again. Cap the end of the suction hose in the spill container. Cap other end of the hose. Disconnect the cap 2 suction hoses. Gather all the hoses fittings and act them neatly between the pump and the filter separator. Place the spill container under the single T-valve assembly extending from tank 1. Disconnect both hoses in the single T-valve and cap them. Place the single T-cap over the double T-valve assembly extending from tank 1. Disconnect the crossover from the double T of the tank to the T-valve assembly. Open to the end of the spill container. Lift over the end of the crossover to the least shoulder height. Uncap and let fuel drain into the spill container. Cap each of them in the crossover hose. Place the spill container under the single T-valve assembly extending from the tank 2. Disconnect the suction hose leading to receiving the point. Hold open the end of the hose of the spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose at least shoulder high and uncap the hose. Walk the hose in the back of towards the single T-valve. When reaching the spill container, go to the beginning of the hose and walk fuel through again. 42. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of 6 suction hoses. Disconnect the 2 remaining hoses for the single T-valve of the cap, then in the spill container under the double T-valve ascending from tank 2. Disconnect the crossover to the double T assembly, holding open in the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift over the crossover hose in the high and uncap the hose. Let the fuel drain into the spill container. Cap each end of the crossover hose. Place the spill container under the single T assembly extending from the tank of 3. Disconnect the suction leading to the receiving point. Hold on to the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift other end of the suction hose at least shoulder high and uncap. Walk the hose back towards the single T-valve and when reaching the container, go back to the back of the hose and walk through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the section 6 suction hoses. Disconnect 2 remaining hoses from the single T-valve assembly. Cap them and place the spill container under the double T-valve assembly. Disconnect the crossover hose from the double T-valve and hold open the hose in the spill container. Lift over the end of the hose, crossover hose, at least shoulder height, under cap, and fuel out the drain and spill container. Lift over the end of the crossover hose, at least shoulder high. Uncap the hose, let the fuel drain in the spill container. Cap each end of the crossover hose. Place the spill container under the double T assembly extending of the tank 1. Disconnect the suction hose leading to tank 1, holding on one open in the end of the spill container. Disconnect other end of the fill discharge assembly. Hold hose in the air at least shoulder high. Walk the fuel back toward the double T valve assembly. When reaching the spill container, go to the back beginning of the hose. Walk fuel through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the 2 suctions. Disconnect the cap remaining suction hose from the double T valve assembly. Place the spill container under the double T valve ending from tank 2. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the receiving point. Hold open the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift other the end of the suction hose at the least shoulder high and uncap the hose. Walk the fuel hose in the double T valve assembly. When reaching the spill container, go back to the hose and walk through fuel through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap other 6 suction hoses. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the tank 2. Hold open in the end of the hose and spill container. Disconnect other fuel discharge assemblies. Hold hose in at least shoulder high. When walking back to the double T valve assembly, when reaching the spill container, go back to the hose. Walk through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the 2 suction hoses. Disconnect the cap of the remaining suction hoses from the double T valve assembly. Place the spill container under the double T valve assembly. Extend the tank from tank 3. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the receiving point. Hold open the end of the spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose at least shoulder high and uncap the hose. Walk the fuel in the hose backward towards the double T valve assembly. When reaching the spill container, go back to the hose and walk through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the 6 suction hoses. Disconnect the suction hose and leading up to the tank 2 and hold open to the end of the hose in the spill container. Disconnect the other end of the filler discharge assembly. Hold the hose in air least shoulder. Walk fuel back toward the double T valve assembly. When reaching spill container, go to the back beginning of the hose. Walk fuel through again. Cap each end of the suction hoses. Disconnect the cap of the 2 suction hoses. Place the spill container under the double T valve assembly extending the tank 3. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the receiving point. Hold open and hose in the spill container. Disconnect the other end of the fill and discharge assembly. Hold the hose in at least shoulder high. Walk the fuel hose back towards the double T assembly. When reaching the spill container, go back to the beginning of the hose. Walk through again. Cap each end of the section hose. Disconnect the cap of 2 suction hoses. Disconnect the cap and remaining of the suction hoses from the double T valve assembly. Gather all the hose fittings and place them in the container. Disconnect the drain fit assembly from tank 1 and disconnect the filter discharge assembly from tank 1. Disconnect the vent filling assembly from the tank of 1. Fold the tank 1, place it in its container. Fold the tank liner, place it in its container. Place the spill container under a single T valve assembly between the 3 and 6. Disconnect the suction hose leading to the berm. Hold open the end of the hose and spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose at the east shoulder and uncap the hose. Walk the fuel in the back toward the single T valve, and when reaching the spill container, going back to the beginning of the hose, walk through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the 2 suction hoses. Disconnect the suction hose from leading to the pump outlet to hold open the end of the hose in the spill container. Place the spill container under the pump outlet. Disconnect the suction hose. Hold the suction hose at least shoulder high. Walk the fuel back in the hose from the single T valve assembly. When reaching the spill container, go back to the hose and walk fuel through again. Cap each end of the hose. Disconnect the 2 suction hoses. Place the spill container under the pump inlet. Disconnect the suction hose leading to berm 3 and hold open the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift the other end of the suction hose at least shoulder high and uncap the hose. When the fuel hose is back toward the pump, when reaching the spill container, go back to the reaching of the hose and walk fuel through again. Cap each end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of 3 suction hoses. Gather the disconnected hoses fitting and place them neatly by the pump. Place the spill container under the pump outlet. Disconnect the discharge extending from the pump outlet. Place the spill container under the filter separator inlet port. Discharge from the inlet port. Hold open the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift the other end of the discharge from the least shoulder high. Uncap the hose. Let it fuel drain in the spill container. Cap each end of the hose. Place the spill container under the filter separator outlet port. Disconnect the discharge from the outlet port. Cap it and place it in the container under the Y assembly. Disconnect the discharge from the Y and hold open the end of the hose of the spill container. Lift the other end of the hose into the end of the shoulder height and uncap the hose. Walk the fuel hose back toward the Y. When reaching the spill container, go back into the hose and walk the fuel through it again. Cap the male end of the discharge hose using the reel of the rolling hose. Disconnect the suction hose toward the right gate valve. Hold in the end of the hose in the spill container. Lift the gate valve at least shoulder height and open the valve. When walking through this hose to back toward the Y, when reaching the spill container, go back beginning of the hose and walk through again. Cap and one end of the suction hose. Disconnect the gate valve. Cap the other end of the suction hose. Disconnect the cap of the 3 suction hoses. Gather the remaining fittings and place them neatly into the pump and filter separator. Load the truck according to the unit plan. Recheck the site of the fuel spills. Clean up the fuel spills. Dispose of waste of the fuels and other fuel-contaminated material in environmental safe manner according to the local policies. Load and bracing the Federal Supply Service System equipment on the 5-ton cargo trucking using the forklift and prefabricated supports. Evaluation preparation, applied risk management procedures, employed environmental shipment protection programs measures according to the task 10192 F5 92 F 1413. Read and understand the installation of standard operation procedures and orders and requirements for requisition, storing, handling, and disposal of hazardous material. Wear appropriate personal protective equipment as required. As vehicles equipped for the using the Department of Defense 1970 DA Form 598 7E before, during, and after the operations on the system components according to the appropriate technical manuals and noted from the DA Form 2404, DA Form 5988E. Any faults found in the performing maintenance check services, unload the fuel service supply point equipment. Place the fuel service supply point equipment on the site according to the layout. Assemble the fuel supply supportive equipment. Inform the supervisor when the system is ready to operate, performing the operations. Operate the fuel system service supply to receive the issue of the product. Disassemble the fuel system service supply. Evacuated product of the fuel service supply into a 5,000-gallon tank semi-trailer. Disassemble the place of the federal fuel supply equipment in its container as appropriate. Load and brace the federal service supply point equipment on the 5-ton cargo tank truck using the forklift prefabricated supports. The evaluation guide: score the soldier on a go if the performance measures are passed. Score the soldier no-go and the performance measured and failed. The score no-go shows the soldier that was doing wrong and how to do it correctly. DA Form 2403 3643 59087 59088 DOD Form 1970 and FM Form 1067-1, TM Form 104320 34314 10 4930-232-12 and PTM 5433-02112, TM 5430-21012, DAPM 71021, FM 3112, FM 3104. I'm going to take a break.